And welcome back to Coaching with the Bible this week, episode 59, season 2, episode 5. And this week, the reading of Chayei Sara, the portion that details the passing of the wife of Abraham. And I want to focus this week on goals. I think goals is an important subject. I mentioned a number of weeks ago that at some point we would get back to goals, and this is that week. We had talked about a little bit about goal setting when the year ended, and I had sent out the annual review, the first version, at the timing of the beginning of the new Jewish New Year a couple of months ago. And in there, I had said that at some point we would get back to talking about goals. And so that's this week. We're going to talk about goals. And it's actually surprising because I think there was a lot of subjects to talk about in this week's reading and a lot of really important coaching subjects to talk about in this week's reading specifically. We have two distinct stories. Each has so many things going on in it. And initially I thought I would talk about negotiation, the idea of getting to yes, getting to what you want. But I realized that ultimately that is a sort of a bigger subject at play here, which is the idea of goal setting. And in getting to goal setting, we learn a ton from Abraham, specifically in the first story. I think we then play it forward also. We won't get into the great depth in the second story with his servant, but really learn a lot about goal setting. And so let's dive in to the story of Abraham in the first story as he seeks to purchase a burial plot for his wife Sarah. Sarah dies. It's in the first verse of this week's reading. And Abraham mourns and he cries for her. And now he has to figure out where he's going to bury her. And this is always an anxiety-ridden subject for people, ancient or modern, is the entire mourning process and burial process. And certainly was the case for Abraham at the time, since he was still a foreigner. As much as he is viewed as a prince and a person of God and a powerful warrior and a winner and all those things, he's still not from here. He knows it. He says it out loud. And the people that he's speaking to fully acknowledge it. And it seems that there are rules in place that will prevent him from doing what it is that he needs to do. But he has a very specific goal in mind. And that goal is to attain some place that is going to be his, where it is that he can bury his wife. And so he sets upon that goal. Let's keep in mind that we're talking here about goals. When it is that we have a goal in our own lives, how do we go about doing that? How do we go about setting that goal? How do we decide what a goal is or a goal is not? What are the steps for us in achieving that goal? Why is it that more often than not, maybe, we don't actually achieve the goals that we set? And how do we keep ourselves on track to fulfill and accomplish our goals? It's a super important subject. The reality is that, ironically, goals create reality. In the work that I do in fundraising and helping organizational leaders and organizations raise more money, so one of the key pillars of our work that was codified, I think, to some degree by one of my colleagues, is the idea that goals create reality. Now, that's not any sort of a new idea to anyone, but it was important for it to be said out loud. And we've seen that that's true, certainly in the fundraising domain. It's not simply that we're going to go out and raise money. We set specific goals. When we ask people or we work with people to help them raise more money, we say, let's figure out what the best goal is here. That's the best possible goal for you. And then we work from there. By putting the goal on the ground or putting it in writing and then assessing based on that number, we are in fact creating facts on the ground, and we are in fact creating the reality and the ultimate result in many, many cases. And so goals are super important. And Abraham's goal is to find a place to bury Sarah. And so he turns to the people and he says to them exactly that. I want to effectively acquire a place of burial. So I don't want just a grave site or a place to just put her. I want to acquire something. I want to buy something. This is the goal. And it's important to keep that in mind. That's the term he uses in verse 4, which in the Hebrew is achuzat kever, which is effectively an acquired grave. It's not just simply a grave site, a place to bury somebody, but it's a plot. It's a plot of land. It's a territory where it would be his and it would be his alone to then have for him and his family. It is a term he uses multiple times throughout. And to me, that is the goal. And Abraham stays fully conscious of it, fully focused on it, and nothing deters him from getting to that goal. And so when it is that in verse number 6, the people basically say to him, look, you're an important guy. You're a king, you're a prince, you're a person of God in front of us. Bury her wherever you like. The implication is buying property here is not an option. Sorry. We'll give you a gravesite, but you can't own land. And so what happens next is that he moves on to the next possible alternative that will help him achieve that goal. He's undeterred. He's unflappable. He doesn't get down. The Bible doesn't describe that he gets depressed. He just goes to the next person. You're not going to help me achieve my goal? Who is going to be the person to help me achieve my goal? And he goes directly to that person. So even though the collective group of people said no, he doesn't care. Abraham goes next, and he goes to the leader, the guy named Ephron, who appears for the first time to us in verse number 8. Let me meet that guy. And so instead of giving up or going somewhere else, Abraham doubles down. And not only does he ask for it, he says he's going to pay for it. Ultimately, we know he pays a handsome amount of money for that property. And he asks this Ephron person for the same thing. And there is this back and forth negotiation on this, how that's going to work, who's it going to be, how much money, maybe it's free, maybe you should pay, and so on and so forth. And Abraham again in verse 12 bows. In the same way, in verse 7, after the first negotiation doesn't go his way, he bows to the people and moves on. In verse 12, he bows again, and then he speaks again. And therein he says, look, I want to pay for this. I'm not going away, basically. The money is there. I have whatever amount of money you're going to ask for this piece of property. Ephron looks around. He doesn't want to be embarrassed. He doesn't want to be shown up by Abraham. He wants to look like a real power leader in this location. And so he makes this statement, what's the amount of money between friends? When in theory, he's sort of wink, wink, nod, nodding that you're going to pay for this property. And then ultimately, Abraham pays a large sum of money for the property. And the key is that ultimately in verse 20, at the end of the story, Abraham finds the place, he gets the place, he buys the place. It ends up being a much bigger place. And those two words appear there again, achuzat kaver in the Hebrew, achuzat kever, a purchased, acquired burial plot. He achieves his goal. And then he moves on to the next story. So what we see here is a person who is wholly focused on a goal. He has a very specific, a very measured, a very attainable, it seems, a very relevant and a very time-bound goal. Effectively, Abraham employs the concept of SMART goals. There you have it. We talk a lot about it, and you read a lot about it in a lot of the books and a lot of the literature about SMART goals. Abraham is a very smart goal. In the second story, in finding a wife for Isaac, also a very specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goal. He has a very specific outcome as he's seeking. He can visualize what it is, and he goes about doing it. He is focused. He is undeterred. He is what the term of Nir Eyal is, indistractable. There's nothing internally that's triggering him to seek something else. There are no externalities that are going to keep him away from what it is that he needs to accomplish. He is zoned in. We call it focused. Laser focused on accomplishing and achieving his goal, and he does. It's an amazing sort of vision of what's going on here, I think, and it's really important for us to appreciate that that is, on some level, what is happening here for Abraham. And it is for us to think about with respect to our own lives and the goals that we set and the goals that we think about but don't actually set. And so what is a goal? A goal is described in an article that I read this week on a website called Better Up, which is a coaching website, but not exactly how we mean it. It's a very, very beautiful site with tons and tons of content and amazing amounts of articles on a lot of different subjects, but it's basically the ability to, it's a platform to connect coaches with those who'd like to be coached. A goal is a dream with a deadline. That's really what a goal is. You're putting a measuring stick at the end of something that you're thinking about and wanting to accomplish, and that's how that works. It's your vision of the future. It is typically time-bound. It's sometimes very, very big. It's not the mission, but it is an objective underneath the mission very often, which is a goal. And it's important to appreciate why we should set goals. If we have no goals, we're sort of aimless on the path. We sort of wandering around with no place in mind to reach. And it sort of breeds an unfulfilled and unaccomplished life. I don't think that's why we want to be here, is to sort of just float around in life. So the goals, with respect to the why of a goal, they really help us set a course of action for what it is that we want to do in life, what we want to accomplish, what we want to have said about us perhaps when we're gone. It sets the course of action. And why else should we set goals? Because it really allows us to get perspective on life's bigger picture, and that it's not in a specific moment per se, but it's a collection of those specific moments. It allows us to see wider, that it's not just about ourselves, and that there are bigger things at play here that we have a role in. But also it helps us to gain control of the future. By having goals and having things that we are focused on, we have things that we zoom in on, that we attach ourselves to, that we cleave to, it allows us to avoid the noise. It allows us to keep the other things at bay. It allows us to say no sometimes. We'll talk more about that in just a couple of moments. And so it's important to think about then for ourselves, so what are our goals? In what areas of life do our goals fall? And so in discussing this subject with clients in the fundraising space, organizational leaders, privately with other individuals, personally for myself, thought about a number of categories where my goals might lie, whether that's work-related, work goals, family goals, personal growth goals, financial goals, health goals, relationship goals, faith goals, short and long-term goals, sub-goals, bigger goals. There's a lot of ways to split it and slice it. But minimally, a person has to first begin to think about those goals, think about those dreams with deadlines in them. And as Tony Robbins would say, and I have not actually mentioned Tony Robbins till this point in nearly 60 weeks of this, but it's really important to connect the goals to the larger purpose. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment with respect to Abraham. Connect the goals to the larger purpose. Connect the purpose to the goals. Have them have synergy and synthesis and let them blend and see those connections, because otherwise it's disjointed and distracted and it doesn't make sense. So we're first going to sort of look at some sort of a perhaps bigger mission maybe, And then we're setting goals underneath that. And that's how that works. So mission is more like a statement of purpose, a statement of intention, the larger why of life, maybe. And these goals fit underneath that. And the accomplishments and the achievements that they bring attach themselves to the larger purpose. So it's important then that we have detailed results, that we have, as Tony Robbins called it, a massive action plan, and that we are sequential in our activities. So when we think about goal setting, we think about what is the goal I want to achieve. We try to make it measurable so we can see whether or not we're actually achieving, gaining, or slipping, or improving, or not. We want to think about what the impediments to that goal being achieved are. We want to then also layer in, what do I need to do to accomplish that goal? So that goal is X, and then there are multiple sub things that I need to do to get there. So if it's, I want to run a 5K, probably one of my goals then, a small one, is buying a good pair of sneakers. Perhaps then it's also with respect to nutrition, that if I want to get to that goal, I need to eat better. Maybe I need to sleep better, right? So these are sub goals. So it's setting up an intentionality around the sub goals that today or this week, I'm going to sleep X number of hours, and then I'm going to work out that run in the morning. And then by the end of week 3, I'm going to get to a certain place. Or perhaps it's a wider goal. Maybe it's a month-long goal. I want to run 50 miles this month. So if that's unattainable, unachievable, beyond realistic, it's not even a goal. It's a joke. And so it's important that it's measurable and realistic, that we talked about before, but that we can sequence the activities and see the progression from one thing to the next that allows us ultimately to see that we got to the goal. And of course, like everything else we've talked about for the last 60 weeks, there's an accountability factor always at play. Holding ourselves accountable to the goal we want to achieve. But also really important is really visualizing that outcome. Because accountability is good, but the visualization exercise is really important. Seeing yourself dunking the basketball helps you maintain the focus. It helps you keep the sequence of actions and activities. Helps you when you're going along the way that you're celebrating the small things because ultimately you want to celebrate the big things. But we have to also appreciate that as much as that we have goals that we want to achieve, very often we also realize that we don't achieve them. Because there are things that get in the way of allowing us, quote unquote, allowing us to achieve our goals. And that's what Nirayal called distraction. And the opposite of becoming indistractable. Distraction is the root causes, the things that trigger us internally that allow us to not stay focused. And it's important, as he writes in his book, Indistractable, to really self-explore the internal triggers. What are my internal triggers? What triggers me to go flip on the television instead of doing additional work? That puts me on social media as opposed to doing that workout. Triggers me to go eat the thing I shouldn't be eating, which is then going to keep me from doing the exercise that I need to do or staying fit in the way that I need to do. Appreciating what those triggers are internally, I think we need to spend more time on traction and distraction and focus beyond just today. But it's really important to keep those things in mind. So we know that there's distraction. We know that there's the ability to create traction in our lives around the things that are our actual priorities, and to turn those values and turn those tractionable items into time and focus time and success time in those spaces, which we'll talk about at another time, I promise. We'll get back to it. But it's also appreciate the following thing I mentioned before. I think it's really important that when we want to stay focused, that we do say no sometimes. I say no a lot. I say no all the time. I think sometimes people don't like that I do that. But in many cases, I think my default for a lot of things is no. And it's not really about goals. It's just certain things I just don't want to do. But in this space with respect to goals, also, certain things come up along the way that we think are important, we think are meaningful, we think are valuable. They're things that we're good at, things we can do, but they keep us from our goals. And so sometimes we say no. Because we want to sort of check and litmus test them against the bigger goal. Does this fit? Is this going to distract me from what it is that I want to accomplish? for what it is that I want to do, for something that's important to me, that's a priority for me. And if that's the case, then maybe the default is no, or I can't answer that now. Let me think about it and get back to you, which is less than no. But we want to think about that kind of a thing. And so what we want to really do is when we think about goals, when we think about Abraham, is to appreciate the idea of staying laser focused, of staying zoomed in on the goal, of not letting anything distract us or deter us or to get in the way of our goals, to set good, measurable, smart, realistic goals for ourselves, and to appreciate a really great quote from Bruce Lee, philosopher of the 20th century. The successful warrior is the average man with laser-like focus. We do not need to be the greatest. We do not need to be Abraham, per se, but we can learn a great lesson from Abraham. And then I'll add in just for a moment here a cool secondary lesson. Goal setting and goal accomplishment and the ability to stay laser focused is also teachable. Because Abraham teaches it to his servant in the course of the action of going to find a wife for Isaac. It's not the reason that Abraham himself doesn't go, but it is something that we learn from Abraham here, is that it's the responsibility on the person in the accomplishment of the larger mission to both do what they have to do and to teach what they have to teach. Abraham is indistractable in his goal, one, to find a burial plot for his wife that's respectful and honorable and deserving of the person who she was, and for the future, for the next generations. And he's also undeterred and indistractable with respect to finding a wife for Isaac. And he does it in a different method by sending his servant to go find this person for Isaac, teaching not only the value of loyalty, which we talked about last year, but teaching the value of staying focused on the goals, buying into the mission. This is where we're going to go here and finish out. I know I'm a little bit long, perhaps, but tapping into the bigger mission, that the mission and the goals of one can become the goals of the other. And Eliezer, the servant, fulfills the goal of finding the wife for Isaac, which is the goal of Abraham. And what we really then appreciate is that both of those goals fall under the rubric of the larger mission being the covenant with God. And that covenant with God is not simply going to be where God provides everything to Abraham and to his descendants, but it is with respect to the idea that Abraham is going to have to do them himself. He's going to have to accomplish them himself. It is not simply, as Rabbi Sachs writes in an article, one of the essays in Covenant and Conversation this week, on the occasion of the first anniversary of his passing this week, that what's going on here in the Bible is God's challenge to us, not ours to God. And what's going on here is that Abraham appreciates the sense of the larger mission. And among the things that he has to accomplish within the larger mission of the covenant with God, which is a very large topic, which we don't have time for, are these really important goals. Getting traction in the land, getting a space in the land, ownership, beginning to take ownership of the property and the land itself for himself and the next generations. It's the only piece of property Abraham ever purchases in the land. And securing the future generations by finding a wife for his son Isaac. Two massive goals on the head of Abraham in this week's reading. He's successful in both. And so it's important for us to focus, to stay focused, to develop our own goal set, to really think about the things that we want to accomplish in life. Figure out how we go about doing them. Think also about the things that get in the way of us accomplishing those things. And set about on a course and a focus, a laser-like focus to accomplishing our goals. That is coaching with the Bible for this week. See you next week.